The great hall of Varnath Prime glowed like a sea of living stars. Its crystal pillars shimmered with soft blue light, and golden banners floated gently in the air. Alien nobles filled the place, dressed in elegant armors that looked more like art than protection. Each shimmered with color, polished to perfection, as if they feared a single scratch would ruin their pride. And in the middle of all that brightness stood one man, Captain Elias Ward of Earth. His armor was old, heavy, and plain gray. It looked nothing like the shining shells of the Varnath warriors. It had dents, burns, and dark marks that told stories no one in that hall cared to ask about. When the royal guards announced his name, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Whispers of disbelief, amusement, and a touch of disgust. To them, humans were a small, backward species, a young race that had barely learned to travel among the stars. At the high table, sitting on her throne of silver and light, was Princess Loreth, daughter of the Varnath Emperor. She was known for her sharp tongue and pride as fierce as her people's son. When she looked upon Elias, a slow, amused smile spread across her pale face. "So this," she said softly, her voice carrying through the hall, "is the champion of Earth." Every eye turned toward the human. He bowed slightly, the movement stiff from the weight of his armor. His face was hidden behind his cracked visor. "Captain Elias Ward at your service, Your Highness." Her smile deepened. "Tell me, Captain Ward, is that relic what your people call armor? Or did you dig it from one of your planet's ancient graves?" Laughter erupted around her. The nobles chuckled behind jeweled hands. Even the guards allowed themselves quiet smiles. Elias didn't move. His voice was calm, quiet but steady. "It is old, yes, but it saved more lives than it has metal left." "Saved lives," she repeated with a laugh. "It looks like it can barely stand on its own." Again the hall filled with laughter. Elias stood motionless. His silence seemed to bother her more than his words. Princess Loreth leaned back in her chair. Her violet eyes glimmered. "Tell me, human, why wear such a thing among allies? Are you afraid we might attack you?" Elias lifted his head slowly. His voice carried across the hall, not loud but strangely heavy. "I wear it because it reminds me what peace costs." The laughter died down slightly, replaced by curious whispers. The princess frowned. She didn't like the way his words touched something real in the air. Still, she pressed on, unwilling to lose face. "Peace, you say? How noble. Yet your armor looks more like a tombstone than a trophy. Surely your kind has better technology by now." He paused. For a moment the hall felt smaller. "We do," he said. "But we learned that strength doesn't always shine." The silence that followed was thin and uncomfortable. The princess forced a small smile, trying to keep her superiority. "How poetic," she said with a faint scoff. "Tell me, Captain, do all humans hide behind rusted shells?" For the first time Elias looked directly at her. Though his eyes were hidden behind the scratched visor, everyone in the hall felt the weight of his gaze. "Only those who've seen what happens when they don't." The words hung in the air like a blade. No one laughed this time. The hall grew quiet, the light dimmed by something heavy and unspoken. Princess Loreth blinked, unsettled by the stillness. Her mocking tone faltered. "You speak as if your wars were endless." Elias finally bowed again, as if ending the discussion. "For some of us they were," and with that he stepped back, silent as stone. The nobles whispered behind jeweled fans, unsure whether to mock or respect him. The princess said nothing, her silver fingers tapping the table slowly. For the first time that night, the laughter in the great hall had stopped, and though she didn't understand why, Princess Loreth found herself glancing again and again at the dull, scarred armor, and the man who wore it like a burden rather than a prize. Something about him unsettled her. She didn't know it yet, but that quiet human in the broken armor would change everything she believed about courage, pain, and what it truly meant to endure. The feast continued beneath the shining lights of the great hall. Servants moved quietly between the long tables, carrying glowing dishes and golden cups filled with sweet blue wine. Music drifted softly through the air, yet beneath all the beauty, whispers followed the human everywhere he went. Captain Elias Ward sat at the far end of the royal table. He ate little, spoke less, and watched everything with the calm patience of a man used to being unwelcome. The alien nobles glanced at him often, smirking or whispering behind their hands. His armor looked dull beside their radiant garments, a scarred relic in a room made of glass and gold. Princess Loreth was in her finest mood. The attention of her guests pleased her, and mocking the strange human seemed to amuse the court. She raised her cup and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "Tell us, Captain Ward, how does a warrior of your kind fight? Do you throw rocks or perhaps hit your enemies with those metal shells you wear?" Laughter rippled through the hall. Some guests nearly choked on their wine. Elias looked up slowly. "We fight with whatever we have," he said simply. "Rocks, metal, or blood if it comes to that." His calm answer drew a few quiet looks, but Lareth wasn't done. "How primitive," she said with a graceful smirk. "We use energy blades that cut through stars. But perhaps your kind enjoys suffering." The human's voice was steady, but his words carried a strange sadness. "Suffering teaches us to value what others forget." For a brief moment, the princess felt the tone shift in the air. The laughter that usually followed his answers came slower this time. She tilted her head, studying him. He didn't speak like a man defending himself. He spoke like someone who had seen too much to care about pride. "Tell me then," she continued, resting her chin on her hand. "You fought in the Zelnar War, yes? We all heard how your species joined that battle far from your world. I can't imagine humans surviving long with that armor." Elias's gaze turned distant as though he were seeing another place entirely. "We didn't," he said softly. "Most of us didn't." Her smile faltered. "And yet you stand here." "I do," he said. "Because others couldn't." The simple words made the hall grow quiet again. Even the music seemed to soften. There was something about the way he said it. No pride, no anger, just a quiet truth that sank deep into the hearts of those listening. The princess forced another laugh, though it came out weaker this time. "You speak like a poet, Captain. Are all humans so dramatic?" He turned his head toward her, his visor catching the light. "Only the ones who remember the dead." Loreth blinked, unsure how to answer. Something cold moved in her chest, not fear but discomfort. She felt as though her jokes had fallen into an ocean deeper than she could see. Across the hall, one of the alien generals leaned closer to his companion and whispered, "He doesn't flinch. He doesn't even look ashamed. He looks like he's carrying ghosts." The other replied quietly. The princess caught their words, and for some reason they bothered her. She didn't want to admit that the human silence felt heavier than any speech she had heard before. To distract herself, she said louder, "Perhaps your armor hides something else. You never remove it, even among friends. Is it fear, Captain Ward, or do you simply enjoy looking like a machine?" Elias stood from his seat. The movement was slow but graceful, controlled. He turned toward her and spoke in a voice that carried through every corner of the hall. "Princess," he said, "we wear armor not to hide. We wear it to remember that we are breakable." A long pause followed. No one dared laugh. No one even breathed loudly. The princess sat frozen, her mocking words dying on her tongue. Then he added quietly, "When you've buried enough comrades, you stop caring about how your armor looks. You only care that it still holds." That silence, the silence of 1,000 alien hearts unsure whether to pity or respect, filled the hall once again. Loreth looked down at her reflection in her shining cup. For the first time that night, her own glittering armor felt unbearably light. Beautiful, yes, but empty. As Elias sat back down, she watched him with new eyes. She didn't know if she was angry, curious, or ashamed. But she knew one thing for certain. The human's quiet strength was something she could no longer laugh at. The royal banquet ended late that night. One by one the nobles drifted out of the great hall, their laughter fading into the echoing corridors. But Princess Lareth did not return to her chambers right away. She sat in silence at the high table, staring at the empty seat where the human had been. His words haunted her. "We wear armor to remember that we are breakable." They replayed in her mind again and again, quiet yet powerful, like the heartbeat of something ancient. Lareth had seen warriors her whole life. She had trained with soldiers and watched them march into battles wrapped in perfect armor and confidence. But this human, this quiet, scarred man from a small world, had spoken of war like it was something sacred and painful. It disturbed her. It fascinated her. Finally, she stood and gave an order to one of her guards. "Bring the human captain to my chamber alone." Moments later, Elias Ward entered her private hall. His armor still covered him completely, scratched metal reflecting the pale blue glow of her floating candles. He saluted formally and stood at attention. "You called for me, Princess," he said in that calm, steady voice. Lareth nodded slowly, circling him like a curious scholar studying an ancient relic. "You never remove it, do you? That old armor?" "Not in company." Her lips curved faintly. "Why? Are you afraid of something?" He looked at her, expression unreadable behind the cracked visor. "You wouldn't understand. That only made her more curious." "Try me," she said. "I have seen wounds, human. I have walked through battlefields. I am not fragile." Elias was silent for a long moment. The soft hum of his armor's life support system filled the air. Then quietly he said, "If I remove it, Your Highness, you will see more than wounds." "I asked you to," she said, her voice firmer now. "As your host and as your ally." He sighed. "As you wish." With slow, deliberate movements, he began unlocking the armor's seals. A hiss of released pressure filled the air as ancient clamps opened. One by one, the heavy plates fell away. The chest piece, the shoulder guards, the mechanical joints that clung to his skin like a second body. Lareth took a step back as the last layer came off. She had expected something strange, perhaps ugly, but what she saw made her chest tighten painfully. Elias stood before her bare from the waist up, his skin covered in a map of pain. Scars ran across his chest like rivers carved by fire. His left arm was completely metal, connected crudely to the flesh by dark burn marks. Across his back were old wounds that had never fully healed, and his eyes, gray, cold, and tired, held the weight of too many ghosts. Lareth forgot to breathe. "By the stars," she whispered. You fought like this?" He nodded once. "There was no one left to fight if I didn't." She took another slow step closer. "Why didn't you use medpods? Our healing technology could fix this easily." He smiled faintly, though there was no joy in it. "We didn't have any, and when we did, we used them for the ones who could still run." His words struck her like a blade. She had grown up surrounded by abundance, healers, technology, comfort. She had never known what it meant to choose who gets saved. Her voice trembled slightly. "And you still fight?" "Yes," he said simply. "Not because I want to, because I must." Lareth looked at him in silence, her proud posture fading. The man she had mocked hours ago now stood before her, not as a soldier in steel, but as a living proof of what it meant to endure. Every scar was a memory. Every burn was a price paid for survival. "You think this armor hides weakness," he said softly, sensing her thoughts. "But it hides memories, pain that doesn't belong in halls like these." For the first time, Princess Lareth lowered her eyes. The mocking pride she carried like a crown now felt hollow. The human's pain, his quiet strength. It broke something inside her that arrogance had long protected. "Captain," she whispered almost to herself, "I mocked what I could never understand." He didn't answer. He simply reached down, lifted one of the armor plates from the floor and held it out to her. "Every scratch here," he said quietly, "is a name." She touched the cold metal gently. "A name," he nodded, "of someone who didn't come back." Her eyes glistened, though she didn't understand why. That night, the proud princess who once laughed at a human's armor sat in silence, staring at the dull metal in her hands. realizing for the first time that true strength was never polished. It was scarred. Princess Loreth could not take her eyes off the man standing before her. The hall that once shimmered with gold now felt dim and hollow. The air was quiet and too quiet, broken only by the soft hum of his breathing. The armor lay scattered across the marble floor, pieces of dull gray metal that suddenly seemed more precious than any jewel in her collection. Elias Ward stood still, his scars glowing faintly under the cold light. They were not marks of pride, but stories burned into his flesh. He looked neither proud nor broken, simply tired, as if carrying the weight of 100 worlds on his shoulders. You fought like this?" Lareth finally whispered. Her voice trembled, unsteady for the first time in her life. "Yes," Elias said quietly. "When you have no choice, you stop counting wounds." She walked around him slowly, her eyes tracing the burns, the deep gashes that had never healed properly. She stopped when she saw the long scar running across his ribs, deep and crooked like something that had once cut through his very soul. "This one," she said softly, "what caused it?" He touched the scar gently with his metal hand. "A Zelnar blade," he said. "They use plasma edges that burn as they cut. I was lucky that day. My commander wasn't." The princess swallowed, her throat tightening. "And your arm?" He looked at the dull metal limb, fingers whirring faintly. "Lost it during the siege of Titan Base. A friend dragged me out before the explosion. I told him to leave me. He didn't listen." Lareth's gaze fell to the floor. "Did he survive?" Elias's voice grew quiet. "No." Silence fell again, heavy, endless. She felt something inside her crack, a quiet ache that had no name. All her life, Princess Loreth had seen war as a thing of beauty. Banners, victory parades, shining soldiers. The songs of conquest filled her childhood. But this human had torn those illusions apart. His war was not glory. It was loss. He sat down slowly on the edge of the marble dais, his armor still lying at his feet. "You asked me why I wear it," he said softly. "It isn't because I'm afraid to show what's underneath. It's because I don't want to." Lareth looked at him with confusion. "Why hide what you survived?" He smiled faintly, but his eyes were distant. "Because every scar I show reminds others of what they lost. It hurts them more than it hurts me." The princess felt tears pressed behind her eyes, though she didn't understand why. "You speak as if pain is something you must carry alone." Elias turned his head toward her. "That's what leadership is, isn't it?" The words struck her deeper than she expected. She had always seen leadership as control, authority, power, but to him, it meant endurance, responsibility, sacrifice. He reached for one of his armor plates, running a finger over a rough patch of engraving. "Here," he said quietly, "are the initials of my squad. Every piece of this armor has their marks. They're the reason I still wear it." She bent down to look closer. Indeed, faint carvings marked the metal. Names, letters, even tiny symbols scratched by shaking hands. They were memories preserved in steel. "You carry them with you?" she said softly. "I must," Elias whispered. "Someone has to." Lareth felt her throat tighten again. She had mocked this man's armor, laughed at its dullness, its scars. Now she realized every mark on it was sacred, a grave, a promise, a reminder of lives that once stood beside him. Her voice trembled. "We wear armor to look strong. You wear it to remember the fallen," he nodded once. "That's the difference between us." For a long time neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy but not empty. It was full of understanding, the kind that words could not carry. Finally, the princess stepped closer and placed a hand over his metal arm. It was cold to the touch, but she didn't pull away. "I was wrong," she said quietly. "I mocked what I couldn't understand." Elias looked up, his tired eyes softening for the first time. "Most people do, until they have to learn the hard way." Lareth bowed her head, shame burning behind her calm expression. "You shouldn't have had to carry this alone," she whispered. Elias gave a faint smile, small but real. "None of us should, but someone always does." The princess stood there for a long moment, her hand still resting on his. For the first time in her life, she saw what true strength looked like. Not in power, not in perfection, but in pain that refused to give up. And deep inside her heart, something shifted. The proud laughter that once filled her voice began to fade, replaced by quiet respect for the human who had survived where no one else could. The night had grown quiet outside the Crystal Palace. The twin moons of Varnath floated above the city, casting pale light through the glass walls of the princess's chamber. Inside, Princess Lareth sat beside the human warrior, unable to speak for a while. The sight of his scars had shaken her deeply, but it was not fear she felt. It was something closer to sorrow and shame. Elias Ward had reattached part of his armor, the chest plate and one arm guard. The rest lay beside him like pieces of a broken past. He stared at them for a long time, his eyes lost somewhere far away, somewhere no one could follow. Finally, Lareth broke the silence. "You said each mark on this armor is a name," she said softly. "Tell me, whose names are they?" Elias hesitated, then reached for the chest plate. His metal fingers brushed over several deep scratches. "This one," he said, pointing to a faint set of letters, "belongs to Sergeant Vale. She was the one who saved me when I lost my arm. She died a day later from burns." Lareth's lips parted slightly, but she said nothing. He continued, his voice quiet but steady. "This dent on the shoulder, Private Reed, he was 18. Thought war would make him a hero. It didn't." His hand moved to another mark. "This burn here, Dr. Hahn. She refused to leave the field hospital even when the bombs fell. The last thing she said was, 'Tell them I stayed.'" Lareth's eyes glistened. She didn't know these people, yet each name sounded heavy, full of meaning. She had attended 1,000 military parades in her life, where soldiers were names on a list, medals on a chest. But here the names were carved into cold steel by a man who had carried their memory through fire. Elias placed the armor down and looked at her. "You see, Princess, we humans don't build armor to show how strong we are. We build it to carry what we can't bear to lose." Lareth looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You carry their weight even now?" "Every day," he said, "because someone has to remember. Otherwise, what was it all for?" His words filled the room with something sacred. Not the pride of victory, but the sorrow of survival. Lareth lowered her gaze, her elegant hands trembling slightly. "We fight for glory," she said quietly. "For honor, for empire. You fight for memory." Elias smiled faintly. "Glory fades. Memory doesn't." She turned toward him, her voice soft. "How do you live with it? With all that pain?" He looked down at his metal arm, flexing the fingers slowly. "You don't live with it," he said. "You live through it. You learn to carry it one day at a time. You find meaning in the faces of the living and in peace and silence in the small moments you can still feel human." Lareth fell silent again. Her entire world, the one built on pride and shining power, felt smaller now. She realized she had lived her whole life behind armor too, but hers was made of pride, not steel. And unlike his, hers had never protected anything worth saving. She looked at him again. "You could have stayed on Earth," she said softly. "Why fight in our wars? Why risk everything for people who mocked your kind?" Elias stared into the distance. "Because pain doesn't belong to one world. When you've seen enough death, you stop caring whose flag it's under. You just want to make sure it ends somewhere." Those words struck her heart like a blade. It wasn't heroism that drove him. It was compassion. He fought not for pride, not for conquest, but because he couldn't stand to see others suffer the same pain he carried. The princess's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. "I mocked you," she whispered. "I mocked all of this, and yet you came to fight beside us." Elias turned his gaze toward her. His expression was calm, forgiving. "You didn't know," he said simply. "Most don't until they see it." Lareth reached down, gently touching the battered armor plate beside her. "I see it now," she said, "and I will not forget." For the first time since the banquet began, Elias Ward smiled, not out of joy but out of understanding. "You'll remember," he said quietly. "That's all any of us can ask." As the moonlight bathed the chamber in silver, the proud princess and the scarred human sat together in silence, two souls from different worlds, bound by something older and deeper than pride, the shared ache of memory. Morning came to Varnath Prime with a pale golden light. The palace glittered like crystal fire as the twin suns rose above the horizon. Yet inside the great hall a heavy quiet hung in the air. Today was the day the royal court gathered again, to discuss alliances, trade, and the future of their fragile peace. But everyone whispered about only one thing: the human. Captain Elias Ward had become a strange rumor among the nobles overnight. Some said he was a monster beneath his armor. Others said he was broken beyond repair. Few believed he was still human. Princess Lareth walked slowly toward the high dais, her long silver robe trailing behind her. Her heart was unsettled, torn between guilt and respect. She hadn't slept all night. The images of his scars, his quiet words, and the names carved into steel still echoed in her mind. When she took her place on the throne, the court bowed. Around her stood generals, nobles, and advisors, and all waiting for her to speak. Then the heavy doors opened. Elias Ward entered. He was once again fully armored, his visor down, his steps steady. Every clank of his boots against the marble floor echoed through the vast hall. No music played, no laughter dared to rise. Even those who had mocked him before lowered their eyes. Something about him felt different now, not in power but in presence. The princess's voice broke the silence. "Captain Ward," she said, standing tall, "we are honored by your presence." He bowed slightly. "Your Highness." For a long moment they looked at each other, two people who had shared the kind of truth that strips away pride. Then Lareth turned to her people. "Last night," she said slowly, her voice calm but heavy, "I asked this man to remove his armor." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few whispered in disbelief. "You saw his face?" someone murmured. Lareth continued, "I wanted to see the man behind the metal. I thought it would make me laugh. Instead, it silenced me." Her words echoed through the hall. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. Elias stood still, his visor reflecting the light like a mirror of judgment. Lareth's tone grew stronger. "We mocked him. We called his armor primitive, his ways old. But every scar upon that armor carries a name. Every dent holds a memory. This man fights not for glory, but for the dead who can no longer stand beside him." The hall fell completely silent. You could hear the faint hum of the palace's air systems. No one dared interrupt. She turned toward the generals, the same ones who had laughed the night before. "We wear our armor to look perfect," she said. "He wears his to remember pain. Tell me, which one of us truly understands the meaning of courage?" One of the nobles stepped forward, his voice trembling. He carries death with him." Lareth looked directly at him. "No," she said. "He carries life, the memories of those who gave theirs. That is what makes him human." A low murmur of respect spread through the hall. Heads bowed not by command but by understanding. Elias finally spoke, his voice soft and deep. "We don't want pity," he said. "We only ask to be seen for what we are, survivors. We bleed, we break, and yet we stand again. That's what being human means." His words filled the hall like a quiet storm. Even those who had seen countless wars felt something stir in their hearts. Princess Lareth turned back to him, her eyes shining with emotion. "Captain Ward," she said, "you have shown me what no weapon, no victory ever could. You've reminded us that strength is not about how bright we shine, but how much darkness we can endure." Elias inclined his head. "If that's what you've learned, then maybe my scars served a purpose after all." The hall remained silent, not out of fear, but out of reverence. For the first time in Varnath history, an entire alien court bowed their heads to a human, not for power, not for fear, but for respect. As he turned to leave, the light from the twin suns struck his armor. The dull gray metal shimmered softly, not because it was polished, but because of the truth it carried. Princess Lareth watched him go, her heart full of something she had never felt before. Humility. The hall, once filled with laughter at a human's expense, now held a silence that would be remembered for generations, and that silence spoke louder than any voice. Weeks passed since the great hall had fallen silent. The name Captain Elias Ward spread across the empire, whispered in mess halls, sung quietly in barracks, and recorded in royal archives. He became a living reminder of something the Varnath had forgotten, the strength born not from pride, but from pain. Princess Lareth changed too. The proud sharpness in her voice softened. She still ruled with strength, but now her strength had purpose. She often visited the training grounds, watching her soldiers. And sometimes, when no one was near, she would glance toward the small memorial garden built at the edge of the palace, where the human often stood in silence. Elias came there every morning, standing before a plain stone wall where he had etched the names of his lost crew. No gold, no crystal, just names carved by a soldier's hands. He would touch each one quietly, as if greeting old friends. One morning, Lareth approached him. The suns were still low, painting the horizon silver. She walked beside him, but didn't speak for a while. The silence between them was peaceful now, not awkward. Finally, she said softly, "I used to think scars were something to hide, that they made you weak." Elias didn't look away from the wall. "They don't make us weak, Princess," he said. "They remind us that we survived." She nodded slowly. "I understand that now." Her gaze fell upon his armor, the dull gray surface still dented and scratched. "Do you ever take it off?" He smiled faintly behind his visor. "Only when I need to remember I'm still human underneath." There was a pause. Then she said, "You could stay here. The Emperor has approved it. We could use someone like you. A teacher, perhaps. Someone who reminds us what courage truly means." Elias was quiet for a long time. The wind brushed against his armor, whispering softly like voices from the past. "Your people don't need a human to teach them courage," he said finally. "They just needed to see it again." Lareth turned to face him, eyes filled with something deeper than respect. Sorrow, perhaps, or admiration. "Where will you go?" "Home," he said simply. "There are still names I need to carve." She swallowed hard. "Will you ever return?" He looked at her then, visor reflecting the soft light. "Maybe, if you ever forget what this armor means." For a moment neither spoke. The silence between them carried everything they could not say. Gratitude, regret, understanding. Then Lareth did something unexpected. She reached out and touched his gauntlet, her silver fingers resting against the cold steel. "Then I will keep the memory alive," she whispered. "For you." "For them," Elias nodded once. "That's all any of us can do." When he left that day, he didn't look back. His ship rose into the sky, cutting through the dawn like a single line of gray light. Lareth stood in the garden, watching until he disappeared beyond the clouds. The days that followed were quiet, but the change he left behind was not. The Varnath soldiers began to wear small metal bands on their arms, not polished but scarred on purpose, each mark representing a life lost or lesson learned. They called it the human tradition, and at the heart of the palace, inside the great hall where once laughter had mocked him, stood a new statue. It was not grand or golden. It was simple, a tall figure in rough armor,